Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever poured your soul into someone else's dream only to be cast aside when they decided you were no longer useful? This is the story of Ella, a woman who gave everything to her husband, Ethan, her ideas, her support, her very identity. He rewarded her by leaving her for a younger woman, laughing at her pain from his throne of success. But he made one fatal mistake. He underestimated her. Tonight, at the biggest gala of the year, Ethan stands beside his mistress, basking in glory. He has no idea his world is about to be shattered, because the ghost of his past is about to walk through those doors, and she's not wearing rags. She's wearing diamonds. Stay with us for a story of betrayal, redemption, and the breathtaking power of a woman reclaiming her worth. The ballroom of the St. Regis was a galaxy of manufactured stars, light from the crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small carriage, fractured and scattered across a sea of tailored tuxedos and jewel-toned gowns. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive champagne, hummed with the curated murmur of New York's elite. At the very center of this universe, holding court, was Ethan June. He was a man sculpted by success. His suit, a bespoke Tom Ford, fit his broad shoulders like a second skin. His smile, a practiced flash of white, was his most valuable asset, capable of disarming investors and charming senators in a single fluid motion. On his arm, clinging with a delicate possessiveness, was Chloe Sterling. She was his new masterpiece, a decade younger than his ex-wife, with hair the color of spun gold and a laugh that tinkled like ice in a crystal glass. "Ethan, darling," a portly real estate mogul clapped him on the shoulder, his voice booming. "The June Foundation Gala gets bigger every year. You've truly outdone yourself." Ethan's smile widened. "We do what we can, Marcus. It's all about giving back." He squeezed Chloe's hand, a public gesture of ownership. And, of course, having the right inspiration. Chloe blushed, a perfect, calculated display of feminine modesty that made the older men in the circle coo. They were a tableau of triumph. From his vantage point, Ethan could see it all, the culmination of his life's work. He had shed the dead weight of his past, a quiet, unassuming marriage to a woman who, in his mind, had become as comfortable and unexciting as an old cardigan. Ella. Even her name felt plain in his mouth now. He had traded her for this, for Chloe's vibrant youth, for the envious glances of his peers, for the undeniable feeling that he had, in every conceivable way, won. He leaned in, his lips brushing Chloe's ear. "See that man over there? The one by the bar trying to look important? He begged me for a meeting last week. I had my assistant cancel twice just for fun." Chloe giggled, her eyes alight with the shared cruelty that formed the bedrock of their relationship. "You're terrible," she whispered, but her grip on his arm tightened in admiration. This was power, and she was attached to it. His arrogance was the very thing that had drawn her in. It was a promise of a life insulated from failure. The auction was about to begin, the pinnacle of the evening. Ethan was set to make the opening remarks. He felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the thrill of commanding a room's attention. He was a king in his castle, every brick laid with his own ambition. He had built this empire, and the woman who had helped him lay the foundation was a distant, faded memory. He hadn't seen Ella in the 2 years since the divorce was finalized. He'd heard through the grapevine that she'd moved out of the city, probably back to some quiet suburban town to lick her wounds. He imagined her in a small, sad apartment, watching television while he was here, living the life she could only have dreamed of. The thought brought a smirk to his lips. As the master of ceremonies began to introduce him, a strange hush fell over the room. It wasn't a sudden silence, but a slow, creeping wave of quiet that started near the grand arched entrance and rolled inward. Conversations faltered, heads turned. The gravitational pull of the room was shifting away from him. Ethan felt a prickle of annoyance. Who would dare steal his moment? He followed the collective gaze, his eyes scanning the crowd. And then he saw her. It was like watching a ghost materialize from smoke. She stood framed in the doorway, a figure of impossible poise and stillness. At first, his brain refused to process the image. The woman was familiar, but the presence was utterly foreign. She wore a gown that seemed to be spun from liquid moonlight, a sheath of silvery silk so densely embroidered with diamonds that it didn't just reflect the light, it seemed to breathe it. The dress was a weapon, a declaration. But it wasn't the gown that held the room captive. It was the woman wearing it. Her mousy brown hair, which she used to wear in a sensible, apologetic bun, was now a cascade of rich, dark chocolate waves that fell over one shoulder. Her face, once soft and prone to anxious blushing, was now defined by a quiet, unshakable confidence. She met the stares of the astonished crowd, not with fear, but with a serene, almost regal calm. Her eyes, the same soft grey eyes he had once looked into every morning, swept the room, and for a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, they met his. There was no pain in them, no anger, no longing. There was nothing. It was the calm, detached gaze of a stranger. A low murmur rippled through the gala. "Is that? My God, it's Ella Lim." The name sounded different now. Not Ella June, Ethan's wife, but something solid, independent. Beside him, Chloe's grip turned into a panicked claw. "Ethan, who is that?" she hissed, her voice losing its musical quality, replaced by a raw edge of insecurity. Ethan couldn't answer. His throat was dry. The practiced smile was frozen on his face, a grotesque mask. The laughter he had shared with Chloe just moments before now felt like a shard of glass in his gut. The king was still in his castle, but the ground beneath his throne had just begun to tremble. The ghost of his past had returned, not as a sad, forgotten memory, but as a queen arriving to claim a kingdom he never knew existed. The divorce had been a quiet, sterile affair, conducted in the hushed, wood-panelled offices of Ethan's lawyers. Ella remembered the scent of lemon polish and old paper, the way the leather chair stuck to the back of her legs. Ethan hadn't attended the final signing. He'd sent his regards via his attorney, a man with a sympathetically furrowed brow and eyes as cold as a morgue slab. Ethan was, the lawyer explained, closing a multi-million-dollar merger. He was too busy building his future to be bothered with dismantling his past. That was the story of their 15-year marriage. He built, she maintained. She was the architect of the silence that allowed him to thrive. She managed the home, a sprawling pre-war apartment on Park Avenue, ensuring it was a sanctuary of perfect order. She managed their social calendar, remembering the birthdays of his clients' wives and the allergies of their children. She managed his ego, absorbing his daily frustrations and reflecting back a vision of the brilliant, infallible man he wanted to be. Her own dreams had been packed away like old sweaters, relegated to a dusty corner of her mind. She had a degree in computational linguistics, a passion for patterns and data that had once burned brightly. Early in their marriage, she'd tried to share her ideas with him. One evening, over dinner, she'd excitedly sketched out a concept on a napkin, an algorithm that could analyze sentiment and emotional nuance in online text, predicting user behavior. She called it a digital aura. Ethan had listened with a patient, condescending smile. "That's sweet, Elle," he'd said, patting her hand. "A little hobby to keep you busy. But leave the business to me, okay? It's a shark tank out there." He'd crumpled the napkin and used it to wipe a drop of wine from the table. The gesture was so casual, so dismissive, it had broken something deep inside her. She never spoke of her little hobbies again. The discovery of the affair was just as quiet, just as dismissive. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tearful confession. There was only a credit card statement left carelessly on his desk. Monthly charges for a suite at the Mandarin Oriental, lingerie from La Perle, dinners for two at restaurants he'd claimed were impossible to get into. The name on the supplemental card was C. Sterling. When she confronted him, her hands trembling as she held the paper, he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked relieved. "Ella, let's be adults about this," he'd said, loosening his tie as if her grief were a minor inconvenience constricting his airway. "We've been growing apart for years. You've let yourself go. You have no ambition. I need a partner who is my equal, who shines." Shines. The word had echoed in her head for months. She had spent her life making sure the spotlight was perfectly angled on him, and he had left her because she wasn't standing in it with him. The power imbalance had been absolute. He was the sun. She was a forgotten planet, her orbit dictated entirely by his gravitational pull. During the divorce settlement, he was generous in a way that felt like a final insult, giving her enough money to be comfortable, to disappear quietly and not cause a fuss. It was hush money for a life she had invested. She took the money and she disappeared. She sold the apartment filled with ghosts and moved to a small anonymous rental in Brooklyn. For the first 3 months, she did nothing. She slept. She cried. She walked through Prospect Park for hours, feeling as grey and formless as the winter sky. She was hollowed out, a structure whose entire foundation had been ripped away. Ethan's parting words, "You have no ambition," became her mantra of self-loathing. The change came not as a lightning bolt, but as a slow, creeping dawn. It began with the crumpled napkin. The memory of it surfaced one morning as she stared at her laptop. His dismissal, her idea. The world had changed since that dinner. Social media was no longer a novelty, it was the fabric of modern communication. Her concept of a digital aura was no longer a hobby. It was a billion-dollar idea. Fueled by a cold, quiet fury she'd never known she possessed, she started to work. She resurrected her old textbooks, devoured research papers, and taught herself new coding languages. The complex algorithms and data structures that had once been her passion now became her obsession. She worked 18-hour days, fueled by black coffee and the burning need to prove him wrong. No, that wasn't right. It started as being about him, but slowly it became about her. It was about proving to the quiet, accommodating woman she had been that a formidable mind had been lying dormant within. She named her nascent company Aura. She used the settlement money, his hush money, as her seed capital. The irony was not lost on her. She hired 2 brilliant young coders, grad students from NYU who saw the genius in her vision, not the timid ex-wife she was trying to shed. They worked out of her small apartment, the walls covered in whiteboards filled with complex equations. For 2 years, while Ethan was gracing the covers of business magazines and parading Chloe at society events, Ella was building. She was in the trenches of code, debugging, refining, and creating. Aura became a sophisticated AI platform that could provide corporations with unparalleled insights into market trends, brand perception, and consumer sentiment. It was revolutionary. 6 months ago, she'd secured her first round of major venture capital funding. The investors, titans of Silicon Valley, hadn't seen a mousy, divorced woman. They had seen a brilliant founder with a product that was going to change the face of digital marketing. The company's valuation was astronomical. Buying the ticket to the June Foundation Gala had been an impulse. An invitation had been sent to Aura's corporate address, a standard solicitation for donations. Her first instinct was to throw it away. But then she'd looked at the invitation, at his smug, smiling face on the letterhead, and a new feeling had taken root. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about closing a circle. It was about showing him and the world he inhabited not what he had lost, but who he had failed to see. The diamond gown was her armor. She'd commissioned it from a young avant-garde designer. Each diamond, she'd told the designer, represented a tear she had shed. "I want to wear my pain," she'd said, "and I want it to be unbreakable." Standing in the doorway of the St. Regis, feeling the weight of the dress on her shoulders, Ella felt no pain. The tears had been forged under pressure into something hard, brilliant and beautiful. She was no longer the architect of his silence. She was the architect of her own resounding success. And she was about to make her introduction. The murmurs in the ballroom swelled from a trickle to a torrent. The name Ella Lim passed through the crowd like a current, each repetition gaining a new layer of speculation and awe. The women who had once pitied her for being so publicly discarded now looked at her with a mixture of envy and disbelief. The men who had barely registered her existence when she was Mrs. June now assessed her with a fresh, calculating interest. Power was the ultimate currency in this room, and Ella had just walked in drenched in it. Ethan remained frozen for a few seconds longer, a statue of disbelief. The world had tilted on its axis. The quiet, predictable woman he had divorced was gone, replaced by this radiant, formidable stranger. He felt Chloe's nails dig into his arm, a painful anchor to his present reality. "Ethan, I asked you a question." Chloe's voice was sharp, a far cry from her usual purr. "Who is she?" "She's my ex-wife," Ethan managed to say, the words tasting like ash. Chloe's perfectly made-up face contorted in a brief, ugly flash of jealousy. "That's Ella? But you said she was simple, plain." "She was," Ethan muttered, his eyes still fixed on Ella as she began to move. She didn't rush into the room. She glided, her diamond gown rippling around her like a silver flame. She nodded politely to a few stunned faces she recognized, her smile small and serene. She wasn't there to make a scene. Her very presence was the scene. A man Ethan despised, a venture capitalist named Arthur Finch, who had poached two of his best analysts last year, broke from the crowd and intercepted her. Arthur was a shark who could smell money from a mile away. "Ella Lim!" Arthur boomed, his voice oozing a charm Ethan knew was entirely fake. He took her hand and kissed it with a theatrical flourish. "An absolute vision. I've been following Aura's rise. What you've done is nothing short of miraculous. We must talk." Ella inclined her head gracefully. "Arthur, a pleasure. Perhaps we can schedule a time. My team will be in touch." Her team. The phrase hung in the air, a testament to her new status. She had a team. Ethan felt a muscle in his jaw twitch. He had a team too, but her words made his own setup feel suddenly antiquated. He knew he had to act to reclaim control of the narrative. Leaving Chloe standing, a furious and forgotten ornament, he started toward Ella, plastering his public relations smile onto his face. He would be magnanimous. He would be the bigger person, the gracious ex-husband proud of her little success. "Ella," he said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone as he reached her. He used the old pet name deliberately, a subtle attempt to put her back in her old box. "You look... well, this is quite a surprise." Ella turned to face him. Up close, the transformation was even more striking. The faint, apologetic lines around her eyes were gone, replaced by a clear, direct gaze. She didn't flinch at the nickname, but she didn't warm to it either. "Ethan," she said, her tone perfectly neutral. It was the voice you would use for a distant business acquaintance. "It's been a long time." "It has," he said, forcing a chuckle. "And look at you. I've been hearing whispers about your company. Aura, is it? I'm impressed. I always knew you had a sharp mind." It was a lie, a blatant, desperate attempt to rewrite history, to claim some small part of her victory as his own. He expected her to be flattered, to perhaps even thank him for his long-ago encouragement. Instead, a small, knowing smile touched her lips. It was a devastatingly beautiful smile, and it held no warmth for him. "Did you, Ethan? I recall you had other words for it. A little hobby, I believe." His blood ran cold. She remembered. Of course she remembered. He had thought that napkin, that conversation, was a meaningless footnote. To her, it had been the inciting incident. Before he could formulate a response, Arthur Finch deftly stepped back between them, placing a proprietary hand on Ella's arm. "Ethan, good to see you. Now, Ella, about that talk. I'm not a patient man when it comes to genius. My fund would be very interested in leading your next round of financing. We could take Aura public within the year. The valuation would be staggering." The word staggering echoed in the small space around them. Ethan's own company, June Holdings, had seen its growth stagnate over the past year. His valuation was solid, respectable, but not staggering. Not anymore. He was last year's news. He watched, helpless, as Ella allowed Arthur to lead her away toward a quieter corner, the two of them instantly engrossed in a conversation that was clearly worth billions. She hadn't even bothered to properly dismiss him. She had simply moved on, her orbit no longer bound to his. Ethan turned and saw Chloe watching him, her arms crossed, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. The crowd was no longer looking at him with admiration. They were looking at him with a new, thrilling curiosity. He was no longer the man who had everything. He was now the man who had let Ella Lim go. The power had not just shifted, it had been a hostile takeover, and the opening bell had just rung. Ethan spent the next hour adrift in a party that was supposed to be his coronation. Now it felt like a wake. He moved through the gilded ballroom on autopilot, accepting handshakes and hollow compliments, his eyes constantly tracking the shimmering figure of his ex-wife. She was a magnet, drawing in the most powerful people in the room. CEOs, tech billionaires, even a junior senator from Connecticut. They all orbited her, their faces alight with the excitement of discovering something new and valuable. He saw Chloe holding court with a small sycophantic circle of her own, but her laughter was brittle, her eyes frequently darting towards Ella and then back to him, filled with a mixture of accusation and panic. Their perfect tableau had been shattered, and she didn't know how to piece it back together. Finally, Ethan couldn't take it anymore. He needed to confront Ella, to understand the how and the why of this seismic shift. He saw her slip out onto one of the stone balconies that overlooked the city, a flute of champagne in her hand. This was his chance. He found her leaning against the balustrade, the city lights of Manhattan spread out below her like a carpet of fallen stars. The cool night air was a relief after the stuffy heat of the ballroom. For a moment she looked like the old Ella, quiet, contemplative. But when she turned at the sound of his footsteps, the illusion vanished. The serene strength in her gaze was an impenetrable shield. "It's a beautiful view," she said, her voice calm. She wasn't surprised to see him. It was as if she'd been expecting him. "Ella, we need to talk," he began, stepping closer, trying to reclaim some of their old intimacy. "I believe my name is Ella," she corrected him gently, but with the firmness of a closing door. "And I'm not sure we have anything left to talk about, Ethan." "Don't do this," he said, his voice dropping, taking on a tone of pained sincerity that had always worked on her in the past. "Don't pretend we're strangers. 15 years. That has to count for something." "Oh, it counts for a great deal," she said, taking a slow sip of her champagne. "It counts for the foundation of my company. So, in a way, I suppose I should thank you." He flinched. "What is this, Ella? Some kind of grand revenge scheme? You build a company, you put on a dazzling dress, all to come here and humiliate me." He wanted her to say yes. He needed this to be about him. If it was about him, he still had some measure of control. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something other than calm in her eyes. It wasn't anger, it was pity. "You still think the world revolves around you, don't you?" she said softly. "This isn't about you, Ethan. Not anymore. My success wasn't built to spite you. It was built to save myself. You were just the catalyst." The word stung more than any insult. He wasn't the villain of her story. He was just a minor plot point, an obstacle she had overcome on her way to something greater. "I don't believe you," he scoffed, a desperate bravado creeping into his voice. "That idea, aura, you talked about it once. Years ago, I helped you with it." Her laugh was a quiet, breathy sound, but it cut him to the bone. "Helped me? Ethan, you crumpled up my life's work and used it as a coaster. You called my passion a hobby. The only thing you helped me do was realize that I could never build anything of value while I was living in your shadow." The truth of her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He remembered that night, the napkin, his casual, thoughtless dismissal. He hadn't just crushed an idea, he had crushed a part of her spirit. And from those ashes, this phoenix had risen. "The core of Aura's predictive algorithm," she continued, her voice level and precise, "the part that has every investor from New York to Silicon Valley in a frenzy, is based on the exact mathematical principles I tried to explain to you that night. You weren't just ignoring a hobby, Ethan. You were ignoring a gold mine. Because you couldn't stand the thought of me, your quiet little wife, having an idea that was bigger than your own." He had no response. She had laid the facts out like a coroner presenting evidence. He was guilty. Guilty of arrogance, of blindness, of a profound and catastrophic failure of imagination. He had been sitting on a treasure chest and had thrown it away because he was too obsessed with the shine of his own reflection. He started, but no words came. What could he say? "I'm sorry. I was wrong." The apologies felt pathetic, inadequate. He had valued her as a supportive accessory, blind to the fact that her mind was a far greater asset than his entire portfolio. He had traded a diamond mine for a piece of glitter. "Enjoy your party, Ethan," she said, placing her empty champagne flute on a small table. "You built it after all." With that, she turned and walked back into the ballroom, her diamond gown catching the light one last time before she was swallowed by the crowd. Ethan was left alone on the balcony, the cold night air doing nothing to cool the sudden burning shame that consumed him. He had traded in a currency of brilliance and innovation for the cheap, fleeting currency of youth and adoration. And in the merciless light of this evening, he was finally beginning to understand just how bankrupt he truly was. Returning to the ballroom was like re-entering a dream that had turned into a nightmare. The music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, it all sounded discordant and mocking to Ethan's ears. His face felt stiff, the charming host's smile now a painful rictus. He saw Ella across the room, surrounded by a new circle of admirers. She wasn't looking for him. Her indifference was a statement more powerful than any declaration of war. He found his way back to Chloe, who was now standing with two other women, both wives of his board members. They were casting venomous glares in Ella's direction. "I can't believe the nerve," one of them, a woman named Beatrice with a surgically tightened face, was saying. "To show up here dressed like that. It's so desperate." "She's clearly trying to make Ethan jealous," the other chimed in. "It's pathetic, really." Chloe nodded vigorously, but her eyes, when they met Ethan's, were wide with a desperate need for reassurance. "Isn't it, darling? So terribly sad." Normally, Ethan would have joined in, feeding on their scorn, reinforcing his decision to leave Ella, but tonight their words sounded hollow, foolish, desperate, pathetic. Ella was the least desperate person in the room. She held all the cards. He was the one floundering. "It's just a dress, Beatrice," Ethan snapped, his voice harsher than he intended. The women fell silent, shocked. He rarely broke his smooth facade. "Let's not be catty." He grabbed Chloe's arm, his grip tighter than necessary, and pulled her towards the bar. "I need a drink," he said, his voice a low growl. "What is wrong with you?" Chloe hissed once they were out of earshot. "You embarrassed me. Why are you defending her?" "I'm not defending her," he lied, signaling the bartender for a scotch. Neat. He downed half of it in one gulp, the burn a welcome distraction. "I just don't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing us rattled." "Rattled?" Chloe's voice rose, bordering on shrill. "Ethan, the entire room is whispering about you, about us. They're saying you made the biggest mistake of your life. Arthur Finch just told my friend that Aura's IPO is projected to be the biggest of the next 5 years. He said its valuation will make June Holdings look like a corner store." The information landed like a punch to the gut. A corner store. His life's work, dismissed so easily. He looked at Chloe, really looked at her, for the first time since Ella had arrived. He saw the panic in her eyes, the frantic calculation. She wasn't worried about his feelings, she was worried about her investment. She had tethered her future to his star, and now a supernova had appeared next to it, threatening to bleach him out entirely. For the first time, he saw her not as his vibrant, adoring partner, but as a transaction. He had wanted someone who shined, and she did, but her light was entirely reflected, borrowed from his status and his wealth. Ella. Her light was generated from within, a brilliant, self-sustaining fusion of intellect and will. "It's just market speculation, Chloe," he said, his voice weary. "It means nothing." "It means everything," she insisted, her perfectly manicured hands clutching his arm. "You have to do something. Go back to her, charm her, remind her of what you had. People are saying—" She hesitated, biting her lip. "Saying what?" he demanded. "That she's the brains you left behind." There it was. The truth he had just been forced to confront on the balcony, now being whispered in every corner of his own party. The carefully constructed myth of Ethan June, the self-made titan, was crumbling. He had never been self-made. He had a silent, brilliant partner, and he had been too arrogant to see it. He pushed her hand off his arm. "Don't be ridiculous," he said, the denial tasting like poison. "My success is my own." But the conviction was gone. Doubt, a feeling he hadn't truly experienced in years, was now a cold poison seeping into his veins. He looked at the woman beside him, at her beautiful, anxious face, and felt nothing but irritation. Her presence was a constant reminder of the catastrophic trade he'd made. She was the symbol of his folly. "I need some air," he said, turning his back on her and striding away, leaving her standing alone at the bar. He didn't care that he was abandoning her, that he was breaking the cardinal rule of their social circle. The facade was cracking, and he no longer had the energy to hold it together. He was suffocating in a ballroom of his own design, haunted by the ghost of a woman who was more alive than anyone in the room. The centerpiece of the evening was the live charity auction, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to extract maximum donations from the city's wealthiest, while allowing them to engage in a bit of ego-driven theatre. Ethan always donated the first item and made the opening bid, a tradition that set a generous competitive tone for the rest of the night. This year, the marquee item was a $500,000 seed grant to fund a new mentorship program for young women in STEM, a cause chosen for its impeccable PR value. As Ethan took the stage, the room quieted, but the energy was different now. The deference was gone, replaced by a charged, almost predatory anticipation. He felt like a gladiator entering an arena where the crowd had already turned against him. He cleared his throat, the microphone amplifying the sound through the vast room. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice straining for its usual confident timbre. "Thank you all for supporting the June Foundation. Tonight we have the opportunity to make a real difference. We begin with a cause very close to my heart, empowering the next generation of female leaders in technology and science." A polite, scattered applause rippled through the room. Ethan's eyes instinctively found Ella. She was standing near the front, her expression unreadable. "To start things off," Ethan announced, "I will pledge the first $100,000. The auctioneer, a slick professional named Charles, took over. $100,000 from our generous host, a magnificent start. Do I hear 150? 150,000? A hand went up in the back. 150 it is. Do I hear 200? Another bidder nodded. 200, a fantastic cause, ladies and gentlemen. Ethan felt a sliver of his composure return. The auction was proceeding as planned. He would win the grant, of course. He always did. It was part of the show. 300,000, a voice called out. Ethan recognized it as Marcus, the real estate mogul. Marcus shot him a supportive wink. 350, another voice. The bidding volleyed back and forth, quickly climbing. Charles, the auctioneer, was in his element, his voice a hypnotic cadence. $475,000 from Mr. Albright, a new high. Are we all in at 475? Going once. This was Ethan's cue to step back in and seal the deal with the final winning bid of $500,000. He raised his paddle. 500,000, Charles. A wave of appreciative applause broke out. It was a perfect, grand gesture. He had secured the grant, reaffirmed his generosity, and could now gracefully exit the stage. $500,000 from Mr. Ethan June, Charles boomed. What a hero for our cause. Are there any other bids? Going once? Going twice? A single manicured hand rose calmly from the front of the room. A diamond bracelet flashed under the stage lights. It was Ella. The room went dead silent. Even Charles, the consummate professional, faltered for a second. "I'm sorry, madam," he said, squinting into the lights. "Did you have a bid?" Ella's voice, clear and steady, carried through the silent ballroom without the need for a microphone. $1 million. A collective gasp swept the room. It wasn't a bid, it was an execution. She hadn't just raised the bid, she had doubled the entire value of the grant. It was an amount so far beyond the expected ceiling that it bordered on absurd. It was a display of financial firepower so overwhelming, so absolute, that it left no room for a counter. Ethan stood on the stage, paralyzed. His $500,000 bid, which seconds ago had seemed the height of generosity, now looked paltry, pathetic. She had humiliated him, not with anger or words, but with a quiet, devastating display of superior wealth. She could and would outspend him without a second thought. Charles recovered quickly, his eyes gleaming. $1 million. $1 million from Ms. Ella Lim. Do I hear 1.1? Mr. June? All eyes turned to Ethan. The silence was suffocating. He could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, watching, waiting. He would have to leverage company assets to counter a bid that high on such short notice. It would be reckless, foolish, and for what? For his pride. He looked at Ella. Her face was calm, her gaze steady. This wasn't a competition to her. She was simply buying something she wanted. The outcome was already decided. He gave a tight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Sold!" Charles slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking through the tension like a gunshot. For $1 million to the brilliant and incredibly generous Ella Lim, CEO of Aura. The room erupted, not in polite applause, but in a roar of genuine shock and excitement. Ella simply gave a small, gracious nod as the spotlight found her. From the corner of his eye, Ethan saw a flash of movement. It was Chloe. Her face was pale, her mask of composure finally shattered. She looked at Ethan, her expression one of utter contempt, then turned and walked with clipped, furious steps towards the exit. She didn't look back. She was an astute investor, and she knew when to cut her losses. Ethan June stood alone on the stage of his own gala, under the hot lights, the sound of applause for another's triumph ringing in his ears. His mistress was gone. His reputation was in tatters, and his ex-wife was now accepting the adulation of his peers for her stunning act of philanthropy. The unraveling was complete. He was no longer the host. He was just a ghost at Ella Lim's feast. The rest of the gala was a blur of muted colors and indistinct sounds. Ethan moved through the thinning crowd like a sleepwalker, his mind a maelstrom of shame and disbelief. He endured the pitying looks, the hasty goodbyes from guests suddenly eager to leave. Each sympathetic pat on the shoulder felt like a blow. Arthur Finch walked past him, a shark's grin on his face, and simply said, "The future is female, June. Try to keep up." He didn't wait for the event to officially end. He fled his own party, slipping out a side door into the cool, damp night. A fine mist was falling, blurring the city lights into a watercolor painting of neon streaks. He stood on the pavement, the rain collecting on the shoulders of his expensive suit, with no destination in mind. His driver was waiting, but where would he go? Back to the empty penthouse that Chloe had already started redecorating. The silence there would be deafening. He walked aimlessly for what felt like hours. The rain grew heavier, plastering his hair to his scalp and soaking through his clothes, but he barely noticed the cold. He was numb. The evening had systematically dismantled every pillar of his identity. The successful tycoon, the desirable man, the master of his universe. All of it was a lie, an illusion he had carefully crafted, and tonight Ella had shattered it with a quiet, irrefutable truth. A desperate primal need began to build in his chest. He needed to see her one more time. He needed to understand. Or maybe he just needed to make her see the wreckage she had caused. He found himself back in front of the St. Regis, hiding in the shadows of an alcove across the street, watching the last of the guests depart. He waited for nearly an hour, shivering in the downpour, until he saw her. Ella exited the hotel, shielded by a doorman's large black umbrella. A sleek black town car, a model far newer than his own, purred to a stop at the curb. This was his last chance. Fueled by a cocktail of scotch and desperation, he stumbled across the wet street, calling her name. "Ella!" She paused, her hand on the car door, and turned. Her expression in the dim streetlight wasn't alarmed, just weary. She had been expecting this too. "Ethan," she said, her voice even, "you're soaked. You should go home." "I can't," he said, his voice raw. He stood before her, a pathetic, dripping figure. The rain ran down his face, mingling with what might have been tears. "I can't go home. You did this, Ella. You destroyed me tonight." The accusation, so childish and self-pitying, hung in the wet air between them. He wanted her to react, to show anger, guilt, anything. She looked at him, her grey eyes searching his face. "No, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I didn't destroy you. Your own choices did. Tonight wasn't about destroying you. It was about showing myself that I was finally, truly free of you." "Free?" He choked out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "So what now? You have your money, your company, your revenge. Are you happy?" "I have my work," she corrected him. "I have my purpose, and for the first time in a very long time, I have myself. Happiness is a part of that, yes, but it's a quiet, steady thing, not the loud, frantic performance you always chased." He reached out, grabbing her arm, his desperation making him reckless. "It doesn't have to be this way, Elle. I was a fool, an arrogant, blind fool. I see that now. I see you now. We can fix this. I'll leave Chloe. She's already gone. We can start again. Together. Think of what we could build, you and I, now that I understand." His plea was the ultimate act of narcissism. Even in his ruin, he believed he had something to offer her, that his belated recognition of her worth was a prize she should want. Gently but firmly, Ella removed his hand from her arm. Her touch was not angry, but final. "You still don't get it," she said, and the pity in her voice was the cruelest blow of all. "You think this was an audition to be Mrs. June again. You think your approval is something I still seek. Ethan, you don't see me. You just see a new, more valuable asset you foolishly discarded." She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The life I am building has no place in it for you. Not because I hate you, but because you no longer fit. My future is not a continuation of our past. It's an entirely new design." She opened the car door. Before sliding in, she looked at him one last time, a man drowning in the rain and his own regret. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't a taunt. It was a simple statement of fact. A closing of a book that had been finished for a long, long time. The car door clicked shut, a sound of absolute finality. He watched the taillights recede down the glittering rain-slicked street until they disappeared. He was left alone, standing in the storm, finally understanding the true nature of his loss. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost an empire he never even knew he had. 3 months later, the view from Ella's office was crystalline. The winter sky over Manhattan was a sharp, brilliant blue, and the city below hummed with a crisp, purposeful energy that matched her own. Her office, which took up the entire top floor of a sleek new skyscraper in Hudson Yards, was a minimalist space of glass, steel, and light. There were no pictures of the past on her desk, only blueprints for the future. The gala felt like a lifetime ago. The story of her million-dollar bid and Ethan's public humiliation had become a piece of New York folklore, whispered at dinner parties and dissected in gossip columns. She had ignored all of it. The event had served its purpose. It had been a line drawn in the sand, a final definitive statement that the old Ella was gone. Her focus was Aura. The company was thriving beyond even her most optimistic projections. The IPO Arthur Finch had salivated over was on the horizon, and every day was a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and innovation. She loved it. She loved the challenge, the collaboration, the feeling of building something meaningful from nothing but an idea on a crumpled napkin. There was a soft knock on her door. "Come in," she called out. A young woman, a junior data scientist named Maya, entered timidly, clutching a tablet. "Ms. Lim, I'm sorry to bother you, but I think I found an anomaly in the sentiment analysis for the new pharma client. It could be a bug, but it could also be a new behavioral pattern. I wasn't sure if I should flag it." The old Ella would have apologized for taking up a superior's time. She would have doubted her own instincts. Ella saw that familiar flicker of uncertainty in Maya's eyes and felt a surge of protectiveness. "You should always flag it, Maya," Ella said, her voice warm. She gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Don't apologize. Show me. Walk me through your thinking." For the next 20 minutes, Ella listened intently as Maya explained her discovery. The young woman's initial nervousness gave way to an excited passion as she detailed the subtle data points she had noticed. The idea was brilliant, a fresh perspective that Ella herself had overlooked. "This isn't a bug, Maya," Ella said when she finished, a genuine smile on her face. "This is a breakthrough. This could be the basis for a whole new feature. I want you to lead a small team to explore this. Whatever resources you need, you'll have them." Maya's eyes widened, shining with a mixture of shock and joy. "Me? Lead a team? But I'm just—" "You're just the person who saw something no one else did," Ella finished for her. "That's not a title, Maya. That's a talent. Don't ever diminish it." As the ecstatic young scientist left her office, Ella felt a profound sense of peace. This was her redemption. It wasn't about a man or a dress or a public victory. It was about this, creating a place where good ideas were heard, where talent was nurtured, where a person's worth wasn't dictated by their confidence but by their contribution. She was giving Maya the support and validation she herself had been denied for so long. Later that afternoon, a news alert pinged on her computer screen. It was from the Wall Street Journal. The headline read, "June Holdings to be acquired in hostile takeover following debt crisis." She clicked the link and read the short article. After the gala, several key investors had pulled their funding from Ethan's company. His desperate attempts to secure new capital had failed. Weighed down by debt and a damaged reputation, the company had become a prime target. It was being sold for parts, its assets absorbed by a larger, more aggressive competitor. Ethan June, the man on the cover of magazines, was finished. Ella read the words and felt a quiet melancholy. There was no triumphant surge of victory, no satisfying sting of revenge. There was only a hollow echo of a life that was no longer hers. She felt a brief, detached sadness, not for the man who had hurt her, but for the 15 years she had spent believing his world was the only one that mattered. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man, fatally flawed and blinded by his own reflection, and he had now become a footnote in his own story. She closed the browser window, the news already fading from her mind. It was part of a past she no longer inhabited. She stood and walked to the vast glass wall of her office. She looked out at the city, at the endless river of lights and possibilities. She was not Ethan June's ex-wife. She was not the woman in the diamond gown. She was Ella Lim, the founder and CEO of Aura. She was an architect, a leader, a mentor. She had taken the shattered pieces of her old life and built a new one, not on the ashes of revenge, but on the solid foundation of her own brilliance and resilience. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, and Ella watched it, her heart full, ready for the dawn of another day. Ella's story is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds can often become our greatest strengths. She didn't just get revenge, she got redemption by rediscovering the person she was meant to be all along. Her triumph wasn't just in a diamond gown at a party, but in the quiet confidence of her boardroom, in lifting up others, and in finally building a life on her own terms. What did you think of Ella's journey? Do you believe her greatest victory was public or private? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And for more emotional and empowering stories like this one, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.